Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Today, I am joined by Mr. Bill Plaschke, the 2020 California Sportswriter of the Year. Congratulations, sir.
Thanks. It's quite an honor. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, my first question is, what got you into sports and what made you want to get into the sports field?
Well, I was growing up, I stuttered. And so I couldn't really communicate that well with people. And I realized I could write. And so writing was my way of communicating. And then I realized at a young age, probably eighth grade, that the one thing you could write about that everybody talked about was sports. So it was my way of communicating with the world. So I started as a sports writer in eighth grade, covering Little League baseball games for the Voice Jeffersonian. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. So I would go cover a game, write about it. My mom would type up the story because I didn't know how to type. And she'd drive it over to the mail slot and put it in the newspaper's mail slot, so weekly newspaper. And the story would appear and people would talk about it. And I was like, my God, that was my key to the outside world. So that's kind of how I started.
That's amazing. That's truly amazing. Everyone's first start's always interesting, and that's really amazing that your mom helped you in that journey. That's really amazing.
Oh yeah, she would type up the stories late at night and drive it over there in the middle of the night. She was tremendous.
That's awesome. So after graduation from college, what was one of your first jobs?
Well, I was a junior at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. I was a junior there, and I applied for 50 internships. 50. I got one response. The Muskegon, Michigan Chronicle in Muskegon, Michigan. Went up there, worked for a summer, came back, finished most of my senior year, applied for 50 more internships. I got one response, the St. Petersburg Times. So I went down to St. Petersburg, interned there, graduated. Well, during the internship, got my graduation. So I was done in St. Petersburg. It was like August of 1980. I was just graduated, and I had nowhere to go. So I wouldn't leave. So my internship had ended, but I didn't leave the newsroom. I said, I've got nowhere to be. I got no job. I'm going to keep showing up for work every day. So they got tired of seeing me around. So they helped me find a job in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I worked. That was my first real full-time job. Was the Fort Lauderdale News and Sun Sentinel. I worked out in the Everglades Bureau, covering shuffleboard and prep football. That's how I got started.
That's amazing. And now working with the LA Times, how did that starting out, like writing about shuffleboard, a sport that's maybe not well talked about currently, how did you adjust to that compared to writing about the more popular sports like football, basketball, baseball?
Well, because that's an interesting question, Joe, because you realize it's all the same. It's people. It's people striving to succeed, people struggling with failure, people dealing with pressure, people dealing with emotions. It's the human condition. So sports, the shuffleboard and the senior citizen tennis players and the prep football players I've covered are the same as the NBA finals and LeBron James. It's all the same. They're all people. So I based all my stories around the people angle. That's what got me, that's what brought me my most success as in my career, is writing about people, because that's what sports is. And it was, so that was my it was an easy link. I've carried that all the way through my career.
That's amazing. That's truly amazing. I'm really happy to hear that you were able to find the calling in sometimes the sports that are maybe not talked about, because sometimes those people will notice that, oh, well, if he's writing or he or she's writing about shuffleboard, maybe a sport that not too many people talk about, that opens up a lot more doors. And I think that's what a lot of young people could maybe look to in the future.
My first column job, I was a Fort Lauderdale News bowling columnist, and I wrote about bowlers. But I wouldn't write about bowling scores. I'd write about alcoholic bowlers, anorexic bowlers struggling with cancer. I'd write about bowlers as people. And that's the same kind of thing.
Gotcha. So, being on the show on ESPN Around the Horn, you've interacted with a lot of amazing journalists out there. Another question would be, when you're like, how important is networking in sports journalism?
Well, that's an interesting question. I come from a tiny college. Nobody knew me. Nobody knew anything about me. I had no money. I had no connections. I've gotten this way just so I don't think I think networking is it helps, but it's not as important as you would think. I think the bottom line for me in journalism is the work. If you can write, you'll get noticed. If you can broadcast, you'll get noticed. If you can do the work, that's why it's a great equalizer. Because I think if networking was important in journalism, at least when I broke in, if networking was important, I never would have made it because I had no contacts. SIU Edwardsville. Most people never even heard of this school. The Fort Lauderdale News West Bureau. Most people never heard about these shuffleboard players and bowlers that I wrote about. But some reason the stories resonated with them. So I think journalism is actually the great equalizer. Is that if you can write or you can report and you can tell a story, it doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, what color you are, what creed you are, what nationality you are. It's a great equalizer. I think everybody has a shot. If you can do the work, you've got a chance. So I don't think networking really isn't networking. I guess I guess maybe it could get you and get somebody to look at your resume, but no, not really. I mean, if you do the work, people are going to notice you.
That's a really good point. I never really thought of it like that. But if you can, like you said, networks can connections can help. Excuse me, but if you can't write or you can't broadcast, but if you can like do a really good job at it, then you'll get noticed. I really think
you will get noticed. Yeah, nobody's in this business. You don't see somebody. Oh, he was hired because he was somebody's buddy. They don't do it because you don't last very long as being somebody's buddy because you have to produce on a daily basis. That's the thing about journalism too is it isn't like some businesses where you're not sure if you're any good or not. In journalism, you know right away. The whole world knows if you can write or not. Every day is a public report card. So connections aren't as important, I don't think.
Gotcha. And especially meeting tense deadlines with sports. When a game ends, you want to have like that. Sometimes you want that article out right away. And the deadlines, you got to be able to adjust your time to make sure, oh well, I got to get this article done by the end of the game, so we're one of the first ones seen.
Oh, that's the pressure. The deadline pressure is always there, and it gets worse and worse now with social media. You have to have it out right away. So yeah, I'm used to deadline, and it's like you don't always do your best work on deadline, but the most important thing about deadline stories, the number one thing, get them in on time. If you can win if 2 words trying to taking an extra 5 minutes to try to win a Pulitzer could cost you your job. Get the story in on time.
Gotcha. That's really good advice. That's extremely good advice, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. And then my last question would be is advice for college graduates. What would you recommend to them right out of graduation trying to get into the sports journalism field?
That's interesting because I graduated 1980, so that was 40 years ago. So it was different in my era. But I would think it's important. What I did was I just got a list of, I'll tell you what I did, and I don't know if it's that work. I got a list of every sports editor in the country, of every newspaper, and I sent them my clips. I mean, the most important thing is when you go into the business, you graduate from college, you got to have more than a resume. You have to have a body of work. You have to have stories done for the school paper, for the school magazine, for the local neighborhood weekly. You have to have stories. You've got to do that in college. Then you send them your 8 best clips, and I just sent them to every sports editor in the country. I mean, that's how I did it. And I know it's different now with Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I know it's all different now, but I just know the way I did is I get your stories in front of somebody who can see them. And these sports editors still look at clips. They still read stories. And you find names and addresses of sports editors at I apply. And you have to also, you can't let geography stop you. There are so many great journalists in Southern California who say, I never want to leave LA. Well, they're going to be working at tiny papers the rest of their lives. They're working at unknown websites the rest of their lives, because you need to leave a big city to come back to the big city. So you need to be able to be willing to go anywhere. I would have gone anywhere, any place. And I did. I worked in Fort Lauderdale. I worked in Seattle. I worked in LA. I worked in Michigan. I worked in the all four corners of the globe. So be willing to work anywhere and get your stories in front of somebody, some editors, send them out, mass mailings, just do it. And find a place, have, the most important thing is you have to have a body of work. So start on it in college and get stories, walk in that college newspaper and say, I want to work. I'll write anything. I'll cover anything. Give me a shot. And then you go from there.
Thank you. That's really amazing advice. It seems like just being that go-getter and, a self-starter, especially, not just letting things come to you. You got to go get it.
Oh yes, you have to go. You have to. And once you get it, the one thing you have that nobody else has, that I don't care, talent, ability, is your work ethic. You can outwork. That's the one thing you can control. You can't control if you're blessed to be a writer, blessed to be a reporter, blessed to be a broadcaster, but you can control how hard you work at it. Work harder than anyone else. Show up, be the first one to show up for work, be the last one to leave. Last night at Staples Center, I was the last one to leave. Not that I worked harder than anybody else, but I just fashioned myself as a guy that works later, as late as I can, getting every last bit of information I can, taking every last moment I can to get right my story. Outwork everybody. That's what you got to do. And you can control that.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, Mr. Plaschke, for taking time.
Well, Joe, it's an honor. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. And to everyone that was listening, thank you so much for listening and watching. And I hope everyone has a good day.
Thanks.